600 people now on our YouTube channel, and I get messages or indications of new subscribers to our YouTube channel. And just the other day, we had a new subscriber that is called The Man from Atlantis. Have you seen that show on telly with Patrick Duffy? Like, that was when I was, I think, that was probably 30 years ago. Patrick Duffy, The Man from Atlantis, sorry. Yeah. Yeah.
Sanji chodan soji chamala chancho badu dami kyabsuchi dami jishiji tsaman drolan penche sanji drogora sho Sanji chodan soji chamala chancho badu dami kyabsuchi dagi chuji jibi somuji drolan penche sanji drogora sho Sanji chodan soji chamala chancho badu dami kyabsuchi Given someone yin roland pension sanjin drugora show. Kangi to zini zone tawa tamji pambishire tambichun tenze kodum jela chance no. Good evening, everybody. Ani chikila tujichis kerangi nazati tola yepe tukushu shigdus.
So Geshe, I wanted to thank Chukila. She's the go-to person here in terms of the regulations, rules and regulations of COVID-19, and she's been making sure that we are all up to date. So Geshe, I wanted to thank you for that. So we really need to still make sure that we are careful in our engagements and interactions. In New Zealand, they had like 100 days of COVID-19, being free of COVID-19, and just recently a family has contracted COVID-19. So it just goes to show that we still need to be careful.
Tinza nganzo michik marwas samangolaya tyogo wenza nganzo tandayina 로마드네 유에잖아 저 인간도 배 파순 조디레 지 가리는 직잘라와 차야 비기 지겨라 모르다 파스데 딘리라 지라바 차야나 소바 그도 원에 서브치고 요사리스라.
So keep in mind that we still need to be careful in terms of the way that we handle a situation, but particularly in public places when you have to touch different things, when you reach out, to shops or whatever, when you're in public transport, taking buses or what have you. No, it's good to keep in mind that we're not out of the danger zone, that we still need to be careful.
이만 돈다니로 질라다 저저 숨쉬나 나자디 응응구문들로 직질라데다 저 데마이메 미신스라 간지 아 돈다 숨쉬스나올라 나자디 여바이네야 숨응구문도스 딘딜랑엔도스 다 간지도 상황은 양남라 치고에서 기어말에 샘제 치고에서 기어말 이명한도 치 응고치에 돌아야 응고 간지에 여바디 치고로 왔으라.
Now, so there are different reports coming out every once in a while, different reports. Some say that you can be asymptomatic for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and then after some time, the symptoms can surface up. So it's not that we need to freak out. It's not that we need to be in panic, but still, it's good to at least have some preventative measures to be careful.
انتدا دكاتي نانزوغي شديدي ان زودي نانزو تيتاغ دندي سانجي چوزوماتي تيتاغ دندي زاتا تيجي سيدندي با جي 가즈 우팅 사버지 봐 소문당 투와이나 아니 강tem바디 니바치아 슈크치아 간지 아니 펜도여버지 차고야 자타 그지 츠간 당분이게 산지 초도 소지 초 and Chanjupa Dam Kelsey, the Tikolaya, Kantutu Logic Shivukurias, and Kansolaya, Titolaya, and it Kunjosumre, and it Yangdore, Laudun Logic, and a Chokonjok Tolaya, and Toba the Tindi, Mashiba Tindiana, and Manziteri, and it Kodurchina Yavundos.
So we started the session with reciting the verse for refuge and bodhicitta, right? So though we recited it in Tibetan, we also sometimes reflect. We either recite it in English, each of us in our own practice, or sometimes we do it together. We recite the words, I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. But the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma or through generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. So if we not only recite those words, but if we also attend the mind to the meaning of these words, and as much as possible, try to make sure that we draw upon the meaning of the words in reciting this verse, whatever we do becomes more powerful. It carries more power, sorry. There's a greater benefit that we get through reflecting upon the meaning of the words. So in the previous session, Geshe spoke about the meaning of the first 2 lines in this verse. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly, right? So these are the 3 objects of refuge, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly, or the Sangha. These are the 3 objects of refuge. Through recognizing what they are, we go for refuge. Geshe have spoken before of the Buddha refuge, and also we spoke of the Dhamma refuge. Geshe is wondering if you have any questions, any doubts arising with respect to the meaning of going for refuge. As those 2 lines say, I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. Any questions? You've been here before, right? I think I've seen you guys before. All right, cool. So do you live locally?
Yeah, in Malula Valley.
All right.
Yeah.
Malula Valley, that's pretty close. Yeah. Yeah. So Geshe said welcome, is happy to see you.
아니 그냥 나중에 US
So have you heard about Buddhism before? Have you had some teachings before, or you're fairly new to it?
Yeah, I've heard a little bit.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
really. I listen to a lot of spiritual teachings from different doctrines.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I took refuge in 2004 in the Buddha Dharma and the Sangha.
Hmm.
But before 2004, I studied the language from 95 to 2004. So it took me a while before I made a decision to take the vows.
That's cool.
And I'm still
Mm.
reciting my prayers every morning. Yeah,
Mhm.
7 times.
뭐 내추 가시 년년이 가리년이
Ah, Kurandi
Tsultrim.
number two main, but then the chulos in Dhamma, then it's each. Some logic. Number two, test, and the US in the mixing, then the and Dhamma. And Kuran drop at the Nima Gupchu go
This cause the dixer
also.
아니 뭐랑라 안데 제다 당감주 남비추 지고 남비추디 테스치 롭종 체투와이나 아니 땡땡 코란리아지 믹스기 추추룩 가서다지 아니 추규 현다 만제기 남비추 통마이비 케추지기 여러스 디 토라야 테스치 장투와나 땡땡 수조 셈라야 아니 펜도 연구열에서
So we're here studying the Buddhist tradition, and what we're trying to do is to look at aspects that are unique to the Buddhist tradition. So this is what we seek to develop in our study, certain understanding of the Buddhist tradition, but also to look at how a mind can be affected by things that are particular to this tradition. So if we are able to recognize that, Geshe feels that, if this is what we intend to do, there will be some benefit that we will get mentally.
제 먼저 출루 저당 다 딩헬 라지고 말았어요. 아니 다 라마 망치에서 먼저 출루 상만로디 탑시직 탑람직 내용 문제지 레더스 간스나 추 템보고 상만로기 간지 수수수라야 제어죄 등에서는 문도 아니 이체 여등인기 가서다 제요기 숨진 남기 동화세야다 데키 토야지기 아니 타블럼 댄샤바디 상마치 규차가요서레스로.
So we recognize that there are different religions, different traditions around the world, and all of them present techniques, paths for addressing what all of us seek and want. All of us want to attain a greater level of happiness and well-being, and to remove some level of pain or suffering. So different religions, different traditions offer techniques for making that happen. Teachers of those traditions taught us how to develop a greater degree of happiness and well-being, and to remove certain degrees of discomfort or unhappiness.
딘자 아니 원이 찬주 강가지 년투야디 저당 야부쇼레샤스 강가지 년바이나 소소소라야 소소소 감다 메발야 참비기 아니 추디 아니 라투야기 고거망아요로스라.
And since many traditions are focusing on techniques and ways to make that happen, if we have the ability to get teachings or advice from many traditions, all traditions, many traditions, Geshe feels that we'll be able to then find the path that is right for us, that works best for us.
딘자 다 수수 감다 메발야 참비기 아니 추디데 장 디코 아니 지 년바다 아니 semlaya 초지 야불레데와 메바이야데와 간지 아니 대바타마 란슈기 용데 딘지지 레바이나 아니 슈 다가라나 떼는 로바이나 아니 수수기 아니 동아세야다 대기 토야기 아니 타블람 약슈디 샤기여서레스 간스는 여러무치 뒤따도지 아니 수수수기 비기 파민 취김 가인버디 아니 갈소다 지우게 마고 존나 약슈리로지 딘디 망부지 송송스
So then we have different dispositions, different inclinations, different affiliations, different mentalities. So we might listen to different paths. Then we will go with whatever suits our particular disposition, a personal disposition. So if we listen to what works for us, we let that affect our mind or our heart. We develop trust and faith, then we allow that natural faith and trust to arise within our mind, then it is best for making use of that traditions. It is best to use that tradition in order to get what we want, which is a greater degree of happiness and well-being, and to remove levels of suffering and pain. So in that sense, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has been saying that it's not that our goal is to convert people to a new tradition. In that sense, if there's something that works for you that comes from your own background, your own tradition, your own religion, then you don't need necessarily to look for something else. You can, sometimes it's best to stick with what you're familiar with.
그래서 디 인자 아니 강가지 년토바나 강가지 년토바나 아니 피길레야 직 소소기 담카지라 그러스.
So if you can, first of all, listen to all those different spiritual traditions, then you're in a position to choose the thing that is right for you.
And pena 강가지는 먼저 넘버도 지바나 단 나도나 단 년투 마소 따투 마소 되네. 계진 두스바 상담은 강가지 년투여 와이나 아니 소소기 피길레야 직 니마타와 제대의 최대기 토모마이비 키치로디 만 통투야지 아니 만 피길레야지 대박이 투야다 아니 디톨라야 중주 아니 텐투야지 텐데 용서 상고도스라.
Having said that, Geshe said that himself he wasn't able to look at all traditional spiritual traditions that exist in this world. Coming from his background, he didn't have an access to all of them. And yet he still firmly believes that if you go with what suits you the best, after having checked it out and looked at what works for you, then certainly through studying that tradition, reflecting upon that, trying to get your head around it, working with that on a mental level, there's a great benefit that you can get from that.
대단한주 라마나마서 갈송스라운디 베나 슐루 참말로디 슐루야 도마 징엔다 마징이 인도 수도론디 아니 슐루 도마 징엔들이야 캡상 여바디 다 지규르 송도스 다 디엠 라오슈 간스나 먼저 슐루야 이제 용이디 아니 지가도 아니 체비칼이야 수수기 샘다마선나 데사디 아니 should check those. The check milling that be gonna shoot the chemical, kind and some meadow, never dodge. Any that didn't call it any Nyangamamu led the edge. Didn't you do us raw?
Geshe, I have had some great masters of the past in saying that if you look at different religions, different traditions, and you try to have a certain assessment, would it be, for example, better to have an interest in one religion or to have no interest in no religion or spiritual tradition whatsoever? In some sense, trying to quantify that, it's best to have trust in one religion than having no trust whatsoever in any religion. In a sense that we do encounter difficulties and problems. This is part of our life, difficulties and problems. If we have at least something that we can rely upon in trying to find ways to deal with our problems and difficulties, if we have something that we can rely upon, it gives us some benefit. In some sense, if you have nothing that you can rely upon, sometimes it can give rise to a greater sense of desperation. You can end up, mentally at least, in a more dangerous situation if there's nothing that you can rely upon.
Repena dan hando jina tam meze na wala ya ta chik ani kanji chujo le ya ani teni ani meze ki shang jinza ani ngang chida ngang sang chik bar was ani chik pi suzo gi ani magi ba yong kaptu chik sem ani pambi kaptu ngang sang yung gu ras kimji kaptu le ya ani pen tang ngaro jimba na yacha gen gya tam pi gi ani temo chom den de ngarang mixi gi pi le ya 아니 대바요사기 엔장만 중고 친구는 소보다 아니 지 초틀레징이 엔 시종된데 가능하라네 믹스에 두즈에 타치도 소다운데 이게 야차 야다도 무스 팽이로지 나랑 손나는 딘디용도 쓰라.
At least Geshe feels that on a personal level, it works for him, in a sense that one thing that we can recognize that is common to all of us living in human society is that problems, suffering, difficulties, and so forth are part of our life. No, they are unavoidable. So at least Geshe says that for him, having something that he relies upon, first of all, the Buddha, but also great masters of the past, such as, for example, the great master Lama Tsongkhapa, to rely upon the Dhamma protectors. Geshe says that at least for him, it works. Or there's something that he can rely upon.
어디 디즈다 다 난주기 셈이야 데버데버다 동함 문데버디 난주 미리 기여여 말에 포모 이여여 말에 아직 메다 던조기 이여여 말 소차 요도 쫄이야 아니 데버데버다 동함 문데비기 삼로 여버디 지규 여러와스 디산점네디 디손 여러가 두 제버치온데 지규 여버디 난주이나 포투를 저와스라.
We also recognize that all living beings, human beings and living beings that are not humans, all of us are equal in seeking happiness or well-being and wanting to avoid suffering and pain. It's not just a statement that we come up with. When we look at those around us, humans and non-human alike, we can see how all of us share this same goal of seeking happiness and wanting to avoid suffering.
쟁안주기에 따지 대пт인지 나와야 개발된지 갈수는 뭐 정마다 아니 즉 사고가 되는 게 무슨 도스 도solai 빼잘친 송여서 도다는 뭐 정 죽대디 같이 죽이어스라면 콜라야 대화지 고구연자 콜라야 대화지 고구연자 다 대화 민치 초갈 둥아리 디지 세야다 라야 쳇다 죽이어버디
For example, one thing that you find in scripture is a reference to not only the way that we behave as human beings, but also the way, if you look at animal behavior, even insect behavior, when you look at ants rushing about here and there, or earthworms and so forth, you can see how also rushing here and there, moving about different places, you can see how it is all based on that wish to find some happiness and well-being and to be protected from suffering.
아니 교단 깨는 데니 총사하지 마도 규메 깨메게 비기 라왕 톤이 트되어지 자원이 요 말이스 로 디송로다.
So then when we address that from a Buddhist perspective, we recognize that first of all of us want to be happy and no living being wants to suffer. So if we do not want suffering, we need to find ways to cast it aside, to rid ourselves of suffering. If we seek happiness, then we need to look at how to cultivate the happiness that we seek. So now we're looking at happiness and suffering. We first of all recognize that these are things that are not causeless. It's not that happiness and suffering do not depend upon causes. It's not that they depend upon no conditions whatsoever. Happiness or suffering are not things that exist by their own power, independently.
Till these are 제단 돌디도 시면 당한도 대두기 규조디 만도 상담은 막 제지기 대화도 동화세 리피지 아니 치 겐지라야 출로라 여대베기 아니 지 론저다 지 내칸라 소바 아니 여비젤라 소바 지 아니 규벤젤라 소바 딘디 지지고 지 야부진 주바이나 다지 대두 참아 아니 동화세토야다 대화도 투야기 samlo di me mangchela yorwas inaya chomne dige ane tedu gi jutso di chi yule maimba so nangi susugi ane samlo tandang thoni yungu yoba di ane nganzole ya ratwe na yores.
So first off, happiness and suffering do not exist independently by their own power. We recognize that they do depend upon causes and conditions, they do depend upon certain circumstances. And yet, when we look at the common way that most people think, it seems that most of us are under the impression that our happiness and suffering depends solely upon external conditions. If we only have enough resources, we would have a good residence, a good house. If we will have the possessions that we want, or the amount of money that we need, that would make us happy. So that would be the key to happiness. Most people think that those things are the key for happiness. Whereas when we look at the perspective that we adopt according to the Buddha's teachings, the Buddha said that the main causes for happiness are not those external conditions. It mainly depends upon your mind. Internally, it depends upon your state of mind.
Tirza dinza da di da zu semla tuyagi pena dumharki zawadi ani semla tu shibigi sem di karingonzen cheres lavdi zu di ani momba mariba meshiba nanzutwa mashiba momba digi shichibi tone ani chagdang chagbu lotusu ani nanzula yata chamandiwa yongya dunga yongyagi shima di and those.
So that being the case, when we look at the unsought problems and sufferings that we experience, the Buddha said that looking at the source for all those problems and suffering, the source for them is, to begin with, the mind, but particularly it is a mind of ignorance, unknowingness, a state of confusion that acts as the very basis for afflictive emotions, for anger, for attachment, and so forth, that result in all unwanted states. All the states in which things do not work in the right way for us. There's always something that is not quite right for us. All of those states are based on afflictive emotions that arise on the basis of ignorance.
가서다 도션 상단 데비 규소디 아니 셔럽 템비 아니 잠바드 제발로 소바 디기 토니 아니 셈레야 조디 아니 셈레야 디기 중요한디 아니 두수토니 용도스.
So then suffering and problems arise from an ignorant or confused mind. And the opposite of that, which means looking at the causes for the happiness and well-being that we seek, they arise from other states of mind. They arise from wisdom. They arise from love. They arise from compassion and so forth. So these states of mind, wisdom, love, compassion, and so forth, these give rise to happiness and well-being.
아니 비기 아니 유라야 심주친 제바체바나 아니 간주기 남주디 간주 레바디 지금 저 현다 만데비기 비기 제바 가주체네야 제 투기하기 네바지겨라서 디체쇼스 송요레스 좀 되기로 제바체는 개랑중에 라바디 제바체체네 오늘 레도나 개랑중 켈렌지 라렌타 오늘 레몬 샤즈는 디그리스 송야디다 산지 좀 되겠다 도모 많이 배기 개주지 자고레스.
So saying that happiness and suffering depend upon the mind was something that the Buddha taught. Now, we need to investigate whether this is indeed the case, which means that we not only suffice with taking it on a face value just because the Buddha said so, but now we want to, first of all, increase our understanding. So we first of all study. Then we reflect upon those teachings. We check whether it is correct, it is incorrect. Do we agree with what the Buddha said? Do we disagree with what the Buddha said? It is essential that we use our intelligence, our wisdom in scrutinizing the teachings that the Buddha gave in order to reach our own conclusion. We have the ability to do that because in our current circumstance, being human, having a brain, having mentality or wisdom that we can put to use in the process of analysis, we can certainly investigate those teachings and come to a certain conclusion. Not only we can do that, the Buddha himself said that we need to do that we need to check out the teachings that the Buddha gave, and only if we find them valid, true or valid, then we can put them into practice. In some sense, you can say that this is a unique feature of the Buddhist tradition.
어디를 딘자 당한 두스 심주 제거 백해점으로도스라 배나 좀 되겠다 동안 그 자와 송대야기 아니 뭐 마리가 세디 마리비 시치비 따지 수민지 남도 국권을 되차세라 소바 아니 공조 응알게 차도 성로 디기디 먼저 셈나야 이렇게 제라 아니 셈디 아니 시디 돌아야 네투 메바디 당간줄이야 딱 뇽여러스 라 좀네디 소마송 켜스키 당간줄 뇽여러스 두스치 두즈마 카주시기 아니 성로 두즈 카주시기 아니 총 뇽 땅투바나 디츠기 아니 샘디 회식 차야지 다 용거라서
So then we do our research based on the teachings that the Buddha gave, and it is important to do our own research. Like, for example, the Buddha said that from this basic ignorance arise incorrect mental attention, which means that first of all, we have ignorance of unknowingness or confusion. Then we pay an incorrect mental attention to things, to objects. And we entertain different misconceptions with respect to things around us, to objects. And on that basis of incorrect mental attention, anger, attachment, and so forth arise, pride, jealousy, and so forth. So it's not that we take those teachings on face value just because the Buddha said so. We can match them up with our personal experience. Like, for example, how does it feel to be angry? How does it feel to have attachment, jealousy, pride, and so forth? We know based upon a personal experience that those states of mind are not comfortable states of mind. They're states of mind that are not happy states of mind. We know that based upon a personal experience. So that being the case, when we match those teaching up with a personal experience, the thought arises, how then do I reduce the power of anger and attachment, jealousy, pride, and so forth? How do I work in order to put a stop to them?
제가 두스 따지 치바나 베나 아니지 콘드슈 사데사기 율들이야 라 콘드슈 사데사기 율들이야 콘드 끼위kal이야 율디 통투디 베디 아니 차탐제니 베 베나 따지 미라고지나 차탐제니 마라톤데야마도 텔레야 레기 차이어바지 통통노다서 다 콘드 슈치모 여기까지야 안다 모니기 메디기 지 연댕기차 레기차 디지 상토바나 콘드 라신 마 시드라이지 콘드 춘르디 야차 야다마라스로.
So then when we think of ways to reduce anger, we first of all recognize that when we become angry with another person, for example, we get to the point in which we might be enraged with that person. So angry with that person that in all ways, from all different perspectives, the only thing that we see is whatever we see is negative. is ill-mannered. We see no positive qualities in that person. But then is it the case that the person has no positive quality? If we then start to think about it and we come to recognize that though we get angry with that person and we see negative qualities in that person, if we can also see that they have positive qualities, just that recognition of having positive qualities start to bring anger down. And a similar thing happens with attachment, with desire. So there is something that you desire very much. You have that strong sense of attachment to it. And then when you manage to get that, you take hold in that, you hold it, it's no longer as attractive as before. In that sense, when you get it, that sense of attachment or passion starts to abate. We can see how this sense of attachment, desire, arises with respect to things that mostly are not in our possession. But not only that, we also have a sense of attachment and desire relative to our own body. So we don't need to look at others, at things that do not belong to us or that we do not own. We can look at our own body and see how, based upon the body that we have now, we have a sense of desire, a sense of attachment that cannot be satiated.
Rather, when deep in your time, so the so goyan chugoyan so chikalo, Chiwa Kanga, and in Rosong Kanga the Mancha Temejigania. Some Yautang Temejigania, Tango, Chavidosra, Kanji Susu, you be looting Susu, they were used come in on the bed any Tizu Yurachik. Something did some of this Tizu Yurachik. Chasaris.
When we look at the sense of attachment and desire that we have based on the body, we can see that just in looking at how much time do we spend on trying to, for example, alter our physical appearance. How much time do we spend on clothes and anointing the body? How much effort and money and so forth we put into that process? How much time do we spend on taking care of the body? Then we can entertain a different option. Like, for example, if we recognize how much time we spend just on trying to change the body to try to make it appear nicely. If we were to cut short that time, how much more free time would we have? We'd have much more free time, wouldn't we?
These are the similar two shots, similar to your dear Benata, Dunatan the Shide, Dunhag Zawadi, Chadam Monsono to those. The Zawadia, Mumba Mariba Tereshas. The Mumba Mariba said the Munzichi, any Nansultachi, Randa Shen, Sova, Kanji, Chetan Chelea, Kanrich Navainaya, Susula Namanshi Gipe, and Tributavan Zindeagi. Lo Shinjulo, Tik, Zawachini, and Chadam do, Teletin, Dumaki dos, Tinza, and it's our Marigo, Torgo dos, that did Toriak Chedupena, the Nambi Shoni, that Sashi Soya did, and it Maripan Goyak Ched, Marik big load in Goyak Ched, T. Tosho low, 아니 셔럽 기약체다 따로 때는 배우고 베스우 차고레스
So in that sense, happiness and suffering depend upon the mind. Everything depends upon the mind. Particularly when we look at that from the viewpoint of our afflictive states of mind, we can recognize the process by which, on the basis of ignorance, afflictive states of mind arise, anger, attachment, and so forth. The basis of all of our afflictive states of mind is ignorance, confusion. Our ignorance is grasping at things as if they exist in the way that they appear to us. So whatever appears to our mind, we have an appearance of ourselves, we have an appearance of other things, whatever appears to our mind appears in a particular way. And our ignorance is convinced that things appear in the way that they exist. Things exist in the way that they appear. And because ignorance is grasping at things existing in the way that they appear to the mind, anger arises, attachment arises, other afflictive states of mind arise, and we end up in experiencing suffering and problems. So in order to address that, we need to address the basic ignorance that adheres to things as if they exist in the way that they appear to us. To put a stop to that ignorance, we develop a certain philosophical view. And the philosophical view that we develop is the one that is taught in the Buddhist tradition, and it is taught in order to put a stop to basic ignorance.
What did it is that these are the song the Jomden Divita Kanji Dorsu Duvaina and Tawaten Jongdang Chovatsa maybe Tony and Rangi Digi Jogoya and Shenaya and Pendit Juria Tab Yashudi and Tawaten Jong the Chovatsa Muni Dorsu Dundi this on those, this on yours.
And as we use this philosophical view, we use that in the framework of the two aspects of the Buddha's teaching. First of all, we have the view of dependent origination. This is the philosophical view that we develop, how things arise or exist depends upon others, and the practice of non-harmfulness. So through that, we develop a greater degree of happiness for ourselves. But also through this view of dependent origination, we work in order to bring about a greater degree of benefit and happiness to others. We do that on the basis of the philosophical view of dependent origination and the practice of non-harmfulness.
Ten trubach, ten in Jones Matobigi, Kangaya Madembigi, Penatachi Susamaya, Sukame Temugo, Sambigi, Samudi, Nanshinki, Trimabadi, and Shimju Chevaina, and Shimju Chetuyach for this one is.
So we mentioned these two aspects, the aspect of the philosophical view of dependent origination. This view of dependent origination is asserting that whatever exists, whatever might be that phenomenon, it can only exist in dependence on and in relation to others. Nothing exists independently. No phenomena exist independently. So this is what we start to investigate. We analyze that. We investigate whether it is indeed the case. Is it the case that all phenomena exist in dependence on and in relation to others, or is it not the case?
Leg China, go Guging Tony, and if drew to a Jida, Gyung China, and if good in King Tony, Jungu and the good in King Tony, never so to a Yimbaji, 무의 차고로스 무의 차고레스
Whatever exists only in dependence on and in relation to others. So when we start to investigate that, first off, we can look at phenomena which are compounded, which means these phenomena that depend upon causes and conditions. To begin with, we can investigate our physical and mental makeup, what we call the 5 aggregates. Like, for example, beginning with our body. We can recognize their dependency upon causes and conditions. And also we can then look at others, friends, enemies, strangers, and we can see that all of them, all those things which are compounded, all of them depend upon causes and conditions. None of them exist by their own power, in and of themselves, independently. They only exist depending upon causes and conditions. Whatever good thing exists, it exists and depends upon causes and conditions. Whatever might be the negative thing that exists, it also depends upon causes and conditions. So if there's some negative thing that you want to stop, that you want to prevent, you have to look at the causes and conditions that give rise to that negative thing. If you put a stop to those causes and conditions that result in a negative state, the negative state will not arise.
데리디자 다 좀된디 송샤기 따바텐종 아니 좀된디 따드르기 톨이야 먼저 카즈스 잠바 치투와나 디츠기 아니 수줄이야 아니 직접 기친 셔럽 기친 간지 아니 다 지금 누셔비 계시셔 단체와나 아니 수줄레버디 야기 쇼주 존디게 아니 몸바 도투야치 땡땡 용거라스.
So this is the view that was propounded by the Buddha, the Bhagavan. So if we study that, if we investigate that, our wisdom will increase. And our wisdom will be expounded if we explore this view of dependent origination.
데리다 로 땡모니기다 베낭안주 데상기 아니 롭종 칸다 치비오네 수수 가주스 비길이야 장보다 아니 제바 제투나 디츠기 소즈 남주디 기기어라스 덴낭싱기 아니 좀된디기 손샤비기 따두 톨이야 가주스 제바 제투가 디츠기 아니 따두 디기 아니 소즈기 펜디드 투야지 야야담 인고르스.
So this is what we seek to do in our study. We want to develop our wisdom. We want to develop our intelligence. We want to expand our mind, and we can do that through a process of analysis and investigation.
레딘자 나즈다 지당기 답변나 먼저 추리 상황을 하는데 지금 나주 진행 중에 아니 차 주비지야다 물론 개가 소바 마음 지거레스 저 탑지레스 이나야 아니 조디 아니 장바 마치바이나 수수기 비 마장바이나 아니 분음 찍고지 되니 아니 다들 사보디 신투에 요마라스 베낭안주지 아니 로종 rakpa mikteche pigilaya ani jaya rigi baina monam gyan drugmudas ti injimi jangudos ro laming gegenjile tunchi labdale tunchi ani telaya ani pesha chechi jangudos dinji ting sabadi teleja jangoyachi ro yungros ro.
So then when we look at all traditions, different spiritual traditions, in many of them, if not all of them, there are certain rituals that are prescribed, prayers that people say. These are parts of different traditions. If we only stick with rituals and prayers, if we don't study what those traditions teach, we're not going to be able to get what we want. Our progress would be inhibited. So if we only stick to prayers and so forth, we will not come to understand matters or things that are subtle, that are deep. It is also the case with things that are not subtle, that are coarse. Like, for example, if there's something that is rather coarse, a certain topic, certain field of knowledge that is not that deep, that is just coarse, it's not going to be enough if we just say prayers to be able to know it. No, we'll have to spend some time in investigating or learning that course field of knowledge. It is the same thing with, for example, a school system. If we want to develop knowledge, if we want to develop understanding, then we need to look for a school system or institution. We need to rely upon teachers. We need to study a certain topic. Only through that knowledge can be developed. And the same thing can also be applied to developing knowledge that is even more subtle. Right? Saying prayers, just being involved in rituals, is not going to cut it in terms of developing a deeper inner knowledge.
Jamba shu chenpochi, komri shu chenpochi, tema kiwana, and ninja the chanju sensei, the gula kese, kabu shujas, you must see what was.
Particularly here when we speak of, for example, developing compassion, developing the mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta. If we just say prayers, and we do say prayers, you can say that, sometimes it seems that we get that impression that in order to develop compassion, bodhicitta, and so forth, we have to include them in our prayers. So indeed, including them in our prayers is one part of that development. But if we're not going to spend time in practicing it, studying it, practicing it regularly, they will not arise in our mind.
Dindri Tolaya, only Suzu, Tuzu Yakshu, di, and Dindri Tolaya, Tanche, Jamba Chevana, Dende, and Manzumis in the Namolaya, Chundi Tembachi, Yunguyores, Susula Tembaji, Yunguyores, the Madobi Tichi, Kazuataji, and the Jamba Maji, and it, Chikman Javasamji, and it here Pentomon Dita, the Pentomandu, Samsung Rajiki. 소화지 돈이 계좌와나 디 나르수 수수수 노르교칙 차기도 왔으라.
So now when you think about it like that, you can see that you need to give it the time that is needed in order to develop compassion, the mind of enlightenment, and so forth. In a sense that if you give it time, your life will become fruitful. You will receive the benefit of those states in this life. If we don't train, if we don't study, if we don't try to put it into practice, if we only say prayers, there's a danger that later on we'll think that I got no benefit whatsoever from love, compassion, and so forth. I didn't find them beneficial. Therefore, there's not much point in persisting with that. So it's really important that we do take the time to not only study that, but also to train ourselves in the development of compassion and the like.
네, 먼저야 라브세팅이 템바카딘칭 콩 임바이네야. 베티 까와 파멜이야. 아니 콜리켄치니 산제 샤바지 콩기타치 야가르키 레벤츠기 제샤비기 템비 케르치 제토바나 안디나노라야. 오니 칼리 쇼잡친 같이 둘이 쇼지 나친 산지샤도 놀기지마도 아니 만남자는 조샤가지 싸우니요 말했어. 베나다 아니 꾸지 가시 그리는 옆에 아니 류용스 저거 비길이야. 아니 짐바타야나 소바 아니 미기 짐바타야나 소바 아지 양라 짐바타야나 소바 근데 쇼지 로 깔이 체면을 잡지니 아니 담아들이야. 로 죽으는 옆에 아니 공격 아니 또 신이 담아산지 샤오지 드리차고레스.
And it is particularly true when you look at the life story of the Buddha, the teacher. Scriptures teach that the Buddha has practiced for so many eons, countless eons, and at the end, he attained the state of Buddhahood, the state of enlightenment. You can get a sense of the hardship and so much hard work that the Buddha went through in order to become a Buddha, through reading the vast body of literature that teaches the life stories of the Buddha. You can get a real sense of what were the things that the Buddha did before becoming a Buddha, practicing generosity, in which he even gave away his own body, or parts of the body, the eyes, the limbs, and so forth. So much hardship. And at the end of his practice, he practiced for 6 years of ascetic practices, and only after that he became Buddha. So then when you look at this literature that tells of this life of the Buddha, you can really get a sense that saying prayers or just aspiring for something is not going to cut it. Without doing the legwork, without putting a lot of hard work into your study and training, you'll not be able to attain that level of spiritual attainments.
Terdiza tanganzuge dewa tobiatan dunga sedi kal majaranjeredos penasuzugi ani nimachigi tachi kala tyusung chedina inchimi kali jabodas ta mikashi kashi negam rena yachi ani mission kokota yana soba onge chela soba ton negam chi bebelu daji yungu yor matobe mang chegi ani kali jam rogo goras tinza nganzu kali chik magyaran jeres tinza kali gyabsa di ani dhyandan temachile ya kali gyabsa waina kali gyabi ani dhyangu chuwas mato chik anzu tsin dinan zamgi ani togu tamsin chiki chedu kali gyabaina ani meset chola sur chik chago res ta hungu gyo tamba tuzu ta temba kadi ching zubi gyo tamba tuzu tutsu yakshu di ani shu chiyagi lobjong chiyali tangchi kuli kyambali teni ani nganzu tsama logi pe yipmi shorsagi yurchi chabari wasra nganzu tanda badu ani kali gyabsa di tsi digi togu tamsam chiki chedu ani mingni kali gyabi jabati nganzu tanda badu del habi gyurochi dili chabari wasra.
So again, we recognize what we seek in this life. We seek happiness and well-being. We want to avoid suffering. So for that end, we need to work hard. We can see the necessity of working hard in order to attain happiness and well-being and to remove suffering, even as so far as looking at immediate things. Even just to have food 3 times a day, there's some work that we need to put in place. It is the case that sometimes we get that quite easily. Could sometimes come at the expense of others. You know, if we trick others or cheat others, or if we all of a sudden have that situation where spontaneously or easily we get what we want, it can happen. But in most cases, to get what we want to need in this life, there's still some hard work that we need to put into place. So even more so, when we look at seeking happiness and wanting to avoid suffering, needless to say that there would be hard work that will have to be spent in order to attain that. So then when we think about it and think of what would be a good and meaningful way that we can live a life, the best would be to study, to reflect, and to meditate on the ways in which we can attain genuine happiness and well-being. And when you use your time in that way, you can really find inspiration in your study, reflections, and so forth. And not only that, we also look at what we've been doing with our life so far. So far, when we look at the way that we've been living our life, we can get a sense of the degree to which we've been consumed with affairs that belong to this lifetime only, with food and clothing, social interactions, and so forth. And have we been able to get the happiness that we want and to avoid the suffering that we do not seek? So when we start to think about it, we can see that there's actually more to life than just this. We can find greater inspiration, greater meaning in our life if we if we spend some time in study and reflection of the things that do bring about a genuine sense of happiness and well-being and avoiding suffering and pain.
Redini 다 저거 처음에 봤어야 돼. 저거 처음에 봤어야 돼. 송디기 된다. 난소리야 가서다. 담카다 마소나. 마슈디 아니 메기 주봉 수준. 메기 주봉 수준 송디 아니 소 아니 랑 데비체도 마임바 아니 셴야 만네바지. 송도스 처음에 봤어야 돼. 셴야 뇌체 메비기 아니 저버질이야 지기여버디 셴뇌 시단체바 dom비기 아니 비기기 룽아기 저버들이야 아니 메기주봉 수좀 세월했어.
So we mentioned the first aspect of the Buddhist tradition, which is the aspect of the philosophical view of dependent origination. The second aspect is the aspect of practice of non-harmfulness, non-violence. So we have different choices here, you can say, in relation to non-harmfulness. But the very basic type of non-harmfulness that we adopt is in the form of ethical discipline, morality that abstains from 10 non-virtues. So it's not that we just avoid those non-virtues in focusing ourselves, it's rather that we abstain from those non-virtues in seeking to avoid harming others. We want to avoid harming others. As it says, ethical discipline, the nature of ethical discipline is abstaining from things that are harmful to others and also the basis of such harm.
제 간스나 베나 다 만사막 데버드기연자 소수기 데비 체도 아니 셴기 데버 초바이나 지그마레스 셴기 데벌이야 뇌견 담아이나 지그마레스 셴나 동하체바이나 지그마레스 티 아니 베나 톱당 담아서나 요마레스 로 산잠 마즈나 고도스 좀든디 라브제 디토라야 오늘 전에기 야자 야담을 중인 집에나 다 메다마스나 다 전부 장장치 메상만로 가우치에지 메상마스위 아니 돈도 순진이 오늘 전에 가우치에지 차야디다 야시 야담을 해셨어.
And we take up the practice of non-harmfulness on the basis of recognizing that all of us are equal in seeking happiness and well-being. And since all of us are the same in wanting to be happy, it's not going to be right to accomplish our own happiness if it comes at the expense of others. How would it be fair to harm others, to cause others sufferings, to give them pain just for ourselves to become happy? Not only it is not the right thing to do, we have no right to get a happiness if it comes at the expense of others. So therefore, if you think about it like that and you behave in a way that is non-harmful, you behave in a way that is completely honest. You're being honest in your behavior. And this is not something that is only appreciated by human beings. Geshe reckons that everyone, human beings and non-human beings alike, would develop the sense of affinity, liking you, being joyous about the type of behavior that is harmless.
rangi devi chedu, rang devi chedu, ani shen laya, ani negyan tangde, digi, ani nyogda tsamlo, tramantigo tsamlo, manche digani yudos, pena megye susu yunari, ani pena turu jinsen susu yunari, ani yaka penzu yinbayinaya, susu deya chedu, ani shen laya, ani marab chede, ditoni tramantigo yunguyo pesiurosra.
We can certainly look at the world around us and we can see how if we act in a way that is looking for our own happiness, securing our own happiness at the expense of others, it brings about problems and difficulties. Actually, all problems and difficulties in the world arise from this attitude of trying to get what we want, our happiness, even if it comes at the expense of others. We can see how it does give us problems and difficulties on a personal level when we behave like that. But not only we, when we look at even animals, we can see also how animals experience problems and difficulties based on this attitude of trying to get what they want, even if it comes at the expense of others. Not only that, when we look at it more on a global level, looking at the countries that we live in, we can see the degree of difficulties, problems, and so forth that are based on this attitude that this is what I want happiness. And if others are harmed, I don't care. So it causes us problems and difficulties also on the global level.
당한 통대는 또 상도 통대 다 디수 그 콜롬비아 카림바디아 배신원서 포토야도 수수위 약속 송야치 아니 롬바 신 아니 점야치 달pen 아니 detention 저서야라 소바 아니 직 nembusun 타야나서 또 상물로 따지 상물로 말을 깡깡 터 아니 상물로 투야치 상물로 마기와치 이디 토는 용구여바디
We can see that working in the motivation that we develop in the different activities that we engage with. You can see that working in the motivations of different countries, for example. Now we have issues, for example, in the political systems that we have. In order to protect one country, there is that impression that you need to then destroy another country. In that vein, we come up with weapons, nuclear weapons, and so forth. So in order to protect a country from certain types of animals, we invent pesticides that destroy a great number of living beings. So this is the type of thinking that we develop based on the teachings of the Buddha. This is the way that we sustain our motivation. And we also take into consideration that this life is quite short. When we also think about it from the viewpoint of past and future lifetimes, we recognize how this lifetime is so short, and there are also future lifetimes that are yet to come. So we then start to change our orientation to also think of what would be of benefit for me in future lifetimes. And through that, we get some benefit. So Leonie is asking, when we say refuge in the Sangha, is this only referring to ordained members of one's community? I've heard Sangha can also include lay people in one's community. Dila Gendulayang Kapsuchio Serta Gendun se dila Rabjung Pamanila ma to Mikala Shagimarves. That Mika Shikala Gyoresena Gendun se di andi soso Shozola, the Mikalayan, the Gendun de Chiktayo Resa, and they did Kandechinas. So Leonie, you're probably one of our Sangha members here.
Tanda di sanji chu gendun sungunang ta gendun sungde di so di pabi kansa jilaya jaguars dili injimi pabi kansa laya bigi gi getsu pamala soba gemon pamala soba tinji gi rabjon jida yinku yimares.
That, of course, was only joking. When we reflect upon the verse for going for refuge, to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly, I go for refuge until I'm enlightened. The Supreme Assembly, the Sangha, in this verse is referring mainly to Arya Sangha. Now, Arya Sangha refers to those beings that have reached a high level of spiritual development, which means that it's not only monastics. There could be, it's not only novice monks or nuns or no, or fully ordained monks or nuns, any person or any being that has reached that high level of development in which they become an Arya Sangha is an object of refuge that is included within the Sangha.
So the demang monsum to deva the mihako the demang monsum to kansa chiya shako bas kanji lam kpi ki mandu lam ngasum changa she de na sonnon jangnon ani leya trene ani thonlo mon de che changin ki ani kewichini shagores.
Which means that also lay people are included within that group of Arya Sangha. And when we think about it, when we think where it fits within the different stages of development, well, an Arya Sangha is someone that came to realize reality perceptually. This is what we call a perceptual realization of the truth. So someone that has developed a perceptual realization of reality. And when you look at that from the viewpoint of the 5 stages of development, we have the path of accumulation, then the path of preparation, then the 3rd path, which is called the path of seeing. From this path onwards, from the path of seeing, then the path of meditation, and finally the path of normal learning. These last 3 parts are parts in which the practitioner has developed a perceptual realization of reality, of the truth. They're called Arya Sangha. So any person that has reached that level, that path, is an Arya Sangha.
The Gabla Kaji Shagors, the Jidan, the Shingwigiri, Gabla Kaji Shagors, Gab Sungan, so the public and Kansa Gendu Kunjoti, Gab Dribi, Dados, mean tires, and Dado, Sanji Chu Monetaja, Pig Chu Kunjoki, Lambro Sugi, Rimbalaya, Suzu Nyamnu Tony, and Shenlea Pendochi Tungi, Kiwi Chavanza, Mandu Tinchilaya. And trout them by na, and Manzu Lambre to Rimbadilaya, and then the Robachi Tuganza, and Manzu Gab showers.
So then when we look at the presentation of the objects of refuge, we refer to the Sangha as being the companionship, which means that we refer to them as those that have developed a personal experience of the teachings of the Buddha. And since they've developed it in a sense of, in the form of a personal experience, an actual genuine experience of the Dhamma, we can get their assistance. They can be our companionship so that we ourselves can also develop those stages. Then Jennifer is also saying, when we talk about wisdom, love, compassion, and so forth, how do we practice to increase our capacity for compassion when we know that we are feeling low on compassion, as we have recognized that it is a real emotional struggle to stay 100% compassionate. Dila shera ninje tsewa dila so wa ngotsu nyamnen chebe kapsula yarwa sanzan ninje se di konkale kawashiu yoresa. Pagachila dende tis senchen dungengi tola samlo tan kalekawa shiu resa. Chezan sanza dende gyache gyatan tamba ninje gi sem kyangma tuwa ina kandechi chena yagares. So Geshe is saying that we just need to kind of stick with that, just to stick with continuing or to continue to work on the development of compassion.
Di Penata to Susu Matubare Mato, di Yonya Meguchi. Imbaina Hung Kyotamazulaya, Yomasiva Chagaras. Tinzangan Suzugi Sunjugan Dangamavata, and it be Namjugan Dangamava Sova. But Dinji Chagi over the Gacha Gatamaris, Niji could Judan Ken Tanjing Shivanaji, Duji Chukandajimani, Judan Ken in Junguanza. And Ninji, you so deep, and a Sunjugo does, Namjugo does, Ra.
But when we say that we still insist or persist on the development of compassion, we do that in a particular way. First of all, we recognize that it might be that for the time being, we cannot practice in a way that exceeds our current ability, in the sense that there are things that we can do now and things that we cannot do at the moment. So we recognize that. And we also recognize that it's not that it is totally impossible to develop compassion. Had it been totally impossible to develop compassion, there would be no need or reason for the Buddha teaching it. So it might be that for the time being, we have a certain deficiency or we lack a certain ability in our development of compassion. But we still take into consideration that compassion depends upon cause and conditions. And that being the case, then what are the cause and conditions that we are missing on in the development of compassion? So it requires joyous effort. It also requires the usage of investigation, wisdom. So we need to look at which areas are we missing on. Is it that we haven't got enough joyous effort? Is it that we haven't been approaching it in the right way? Is it that we still lack a certain degree of wisdom to be able to develop the right sense of compassion? So we start to look at all these areas and try to pin down what we are missing or what is not sufficient in the development of compassion and try to address that.
Pena nganta ninji ki kakshu di ninji ki dang samdang ninji mi bi ani nyamta neba nyamta doji ingoya sawni mendas ta ninji ki kakshu di kacha wasan ninji ki ya di simja tamjele ya 참을래 심전 참을래 ninji go sonza ta kakshu di kacha wasan pile ya susu ya marab chingi kontro tsawu 지여로다 저 말을 제대로 들려야 인지기에 가고 차고라서 다 뒤쪽이 아니 무슨 지가 있느냐 시선도 비길래야 아니 가선도 배 컨트롤 잡고 사정이지 패시요 말했어 마시 몸비 왕기 아니 뉴비 샤왕기 왕기 컨트롤 사기요 버디 세우슈지리스 그래서 그 아까 그 뉴비 샤왕기 돈 그 차로라 상성기 로지가 봐나 인지 상에디 용초지 용어바지 차가도 왔어라.
So just to illustrate that, when we develop compassion, the type of compassion that we want to develop is the one that is extended equally to all living beings, to all sentient beings. So it doesn't become that difficult to develop compassion to someone that is in a disadvantageous situation, someone that is facing hardship. It's not that difficult. The most difficult thing to do is to develop compassion towards someone that is harming you, someone that is working in one way or another that you find not pleasing. So it becomes very difficult to develop compassion towards that person. And one thing that you can think of is you start asking questions, posing questions in your mind. Is it that that person is acting independently in harming you? Or is it that they lack independence in their actions, in the sense that are they doing it completely knowingly? Are they getting angry with you completely knowingly and being totally voluntarily giving rise to anger in order to harm you? Or are they under the sway of anger and they have no control? We recognize that when we fall under the power of afflictive states of mind, they control us. It's not that we control our afflictive emotions, they control us. So a person that is, for example, getting angry at us and harming us as a result of their anger is not someone that has control over the mind. They're under the control of their own afflictive states of mind. So you can think about this, for example, as a way of generating a sense of compassion for someone that cannot control the mind, someone that whom the mind is controlled by afflictive emotions. All right, so let's leave it here for now. We will do some dedication prayers, and just a reminder that for those of you who are interested, we have another Saturday in which we'll have prayers for Toten Gyalpo. So you're welcome to look at our website and find the link to the on YouTube link to the 24-hour FMNT practice of Tonton Gyalpo for the sake of all the people around the world that are affected by COVID-19. So we'll say now a couple of dedication prayers in English or Tibetan. You have the power. Rinpoche make pana ki gyuchi kyewan yamba me payan konde kondo bewa sho kowe shinkandu pendan de wa malu juwene chenre si wan tenzin gyatso shape si te padu thank you chi
Gyalwe
ten zinkyon pewe kunzo topo choson kowe le montu drupa daso duje kondu shate.
Good night.
Ani chuki kahan niyamdo küt keşin diyorsa.
Night. Country.